Okay, so when you hear the phrase the Silk Road, what comes to mind? I mean, for most of us, it's probably a fairly simple image.
Yeah, I think so.
One long dusty road, maybe some camels,
Yeah.
stretching way out from China, carrying silk all the way to Rome. Kind of this single ancient highway.
That picture is incredibly sticky, isn't it? It's sort of the pop culture version.
Right.
But the sources we've been looking at, they make it really clear right from the start that this simple idea, well, it misses almost everything. The reality was so much more complex, much more fascinating.
And that's exactly what we want to dig into here. We use this source material you've gathered to really peel back those layers. Look beyond just that simple image. We want to understand the real Silk Roads. Who actually made them? What really moved along? Because it was way more than just silk.
That's so much more.
And, crucially, why this ancient network still matters. Why it echoes today in global events right now. So yeah, get ready to maybe rethink some things.
Yeah, the sources really push us to see something far bigger, more dynamic, more influential than just that name suggests. A network that literally shaped continents, connected cultures, in ways we're still unpacking, really.
Okay, let's start right there with the name itself, Silk Road. It sounds ancient, doesn't it? Like something people back then actually called it.
It does sound that way. But the sources point out something pretty surprising.
Which is?
The term Silk Road, or Seidenstrasse in the original German, it's actually, well, it's pretty recent in the grand scheme of things.
Recent? Like how recent?
It wasn't used by the traders or travelers themselves, not in ancient times. It was coined much, much later.
Yeah.
1877, actually.
1877. Wait, that's less than 150 years ago.
Exactly.
Wow. That really changes the picture. So not an ancient name at all.
Not at all. It was coined by a German geographer, historian, Ferdinand von Richthofen.
Ferdinand von Richthofen. And 1877. What was happening then?
Well, the sources find that context interesting, too. 1877 isn't long after Germany unified, right? Germany was emerging as this new major European power, and they were starting to look eastward, for influence, for trade, maybe strategic connections, perhaps feeling a bit boxed in by the older powers in Western Europe.
So coining this evocative name for these ancient east-west roads, it kind of fit with their own ambitions at the time. Looking east.
It seems like it resonated with that contemporary thinking, yeah. A nice historical echo, as you said, a European power looking east.
Fascinating. Okay, so the name's modern, but the sources say it's still a decent name, right? Despite the origin.
They do suggest that, yes, Silk Road, or maybe more accurately, Silk Roads, plural,
right,
is still pretty appropriate. It's catchy, and silk was just incredibly important, hugely symbolic.
It was the star product, even if not the only one.
Absolutely. It was uniquely valuable, easy to transport compared to, say, grain or timber, and just universally desired by elites everywhere from China to the Mediterranean. So the name highlights that key commodity.
So the popular image might get a lot wrong, but it kind of nails the importance of silk.
It definitely does. Silk was central. But, as you hinted, the road part. That's where the simple image really falls apart.
Oh, okay.
The sources are really emphatic on this. It was never a single paved highway stretching thousands of miles continuously.
It wasn't like, say, the Appian Way or the Roman road system, built and maintained by one empire.
Not even close. Think less road, more network. Yeah. A really complex, shifting network of routes. Overland paths, yeah, but also desert tracks, mountain passes, and connecting sometimes to rivers or even sea lanes. It was incredibly dynamic.
Dynamic how? What made it shift?
Oh, lots of things. Geopolitics was huge. If one area got unstable, war, nomadic raids, empires collapsing, merchants would just find another way, find a safer path. The sources mention, for example, conflicts between Parthian Iran and Rome.
Okay.
Sometimes that would push trade routes further north, maybe around the Caspian Sea, instead of going through, say, Syria.
So they'd adapt. They weren't locked into one route.
Exactly. They tried river routes too, but those could be unreliable. Floods, droughts.
So not static infrastructure, it was fluid, constantly adapting across this huge area.
Huge is the word, and the geography itself is key here. We're talking Eurasia. And the sources make this really fundamental point. Europe and Asia, they're not separate like the Americas and Africa, divided by oceans.
Right. It's one giant landmass.
One massive connected landmass, and that's what made these extensive overland connections possible in a way they weren't really elsewhere, not before modern transport anyway.
A single land bridge, basically.
You got it. And the time frame. The time frame this network operated is just staggering.
How long are we talking?
Roughly 2nd century BC, so what, over 2,200 years ago?
Wow.
All the way through to about the mid-16th century AD.
So 1,700 years.
About 1,700 years of continuous activity. The source points out that's longer than Christianity or Islam have even existed.
17 centuries. That's incredible longevity for a trade network.
Yeah.
But it wasn't always booming for that whole time, surely. The sources talk about peaks, right?
Oh yeah, definitely peaks and troughs. They identify 3 main golden ages, basically, times when the Silk Roads were really flourishing.
And what caused those peaks?
Significantly, they line up almost perfectly with periods of large, stable empires. Empires that could provide security and infrastructure across vast stretches of territory.
Makes sense. Like who?
Well, the first peak was in the early centuries AD. You had the Han Dynasty in China and the Parthian Empire in Iran, both powerful and pretty stable at the same time.
Okay, connecting east and west.
Right. Created a secure corridor. Then the second peak, maybe 7th to 10th centuries AD, that's when you have the big Islamic empires, the Umayyads and the Abbasids. They controlled that huge central chunk of Eurasia, Middle East through Central Asia.
Ghetto territory.
Absolutely. And then the third, maybe the most famous one, is the 13th and 14th centuries, the time of the Pax Mongolica.
The Mongol Empire.
Yeah, the relative peace and stability the Mongols imposed across their absolutely enormous empire, stretching from Eastern Europe basically to the Pacific, that really opened things up for travel and trade.
So it really boils down to big, stable empires equals safe roads equals lots of trade.
Pretty much. Security was everything for those merchants. Long, dangerous journeys.
You needed protection.
You needed protection, reliable routes, predictable tolls. Stable governments provided that, or tried to. Fewer bandits, maintained way stations, reduced the risk, reduced the cost.
Let's rewind then to the very start. How did this huge east-west connection even begin? The sources have this really interesting origin story. Almost accidental. It wasn't about trade at first.
Not at all, no. The Han Dynasty in China, their initial push westward wasn't about silk or spices. It was pure military necessity.
Defense. Defense against who?
They were under serious pressure from these powerful nomadic groups to their north and west. Highly mobile cavalry peoples.
Like the Xiongnu. People sometimes link them to the Huns or Scythians.
Exactly those groups. Formidable horse archers. And the Han military, well, they found themselves kind of outmatched.
How so?
The sources highlight that the Chinese horse breeds they had back then, they just weren't as big or fast or tough as the horses the nomads were riding.
Okay. So they needed better horses for their own cavalry.
That was the trigger. They needed better war horses. And the Han heard these reports, maybe a bit exaggerated, about incredible horses way out west. Heavenly horses.
In the Fergana valleys, west of the Tian Shan Mountains, modern Central Asia. These horses were supposedly amazing, sweating blood, top quality.
Wow, a quest for super horses. And the emperor actually sent people to find them.
He did. Emperor Wu of Han, driven by this military need. The sources describe this incredibly tough expedition, maybe 100 people setting out into completely unknown territory.
Dangerous journey.
Hugely dangerous. They had to cross places like the Taklamakan Desert.
The Taklamakan. Isn't that the one with the really grim name?
That's the one. Yeah, the name is often translated as something like go in and you won't come out.
Or Desert of No Return. It's just this massive sandy desert, a huge barrier. The sources note the main Silk Road routes later had to carefully skirt around its northern and southern edges, relying completely on water coming down from the mountains nearby.
Desert of No Return really puts that first expedition into perspective. High stakes.
Absolutely underscores the risk. But that expedition, despite everything, it succeeded in a bigger way. It came back with news about the horses, yes. Eventually, they got the horses, after some military campaigns.
Right.
But critically, they came back with information, intelligence about the world further west.
Information. Maybe even more valuable than the horses, initially.
You could argue that, yeah.
Yeah.
The envoys reported back about powerful kingdoms like Parthian Iran, about sophisticated cultures, even hints about India.
So it wasn't just empty space out there.
Exactly. This was a revelation to the Han court. It completely broadened their horizons. Suddenly, it wasn't just about fighting nomads. It was about potentially engaging with this whole other civilized world to the west. Diplomacy and, crucially, trade.
So the need for war horses accidentally kicked off this whole idea of connecting with the West through trade.
Classic unintended consequences, really, starting a chain reaction that literally changed the world map. And as those routes developed, especially around the Taklamakan, settlements naturally grew up around the water sources, the oases. These became the famous oasis cities.
Kashgar, Turpan, Khotan, those names.
Samarkand, Bukhara, exactly. They weren't just random stops, they were essential for survival, for trade.
Like service stations on an ancient highway.
Pretty much. Places to rest, get water, food, fresh animals, and vital marketplaces where goods actually changed hands. The sources stress how important they were. You see them popping up in literature and records from all different cultures along the route. They were the absolute heartbeats of the overland network.
Okay, so we've got the network.
Yeah.
Vast, shifting, born from a need for horses, sustained by these oasis cities. Now let's talk goods. Silk, obviously. But what else was moving? You said it was a huge variety.
It really was an incredible mix. Reflecting all the different resources and skills across Eurasia, silk got the headlines, but it was far from the only valuable thing.
Let's stick with silk for a second, though. Why was it the defining thing? What made it so special?
Its properties were just unique back then. Incredibly light, strong for its weight, insulating, soft. And it took dyes beautifully. You got these vibrant, luxurious fabrics.
Nothing like it in the West.
Not really, not on that scale or quality. So elites everywhere, Rome, Persia, India kings, emperors, rich merchants, they all craved it. Huge status symbol, pure luxury.
The Romans were nuts for it, weren't they? I remember reading Pliny the Elder complaining about all the Roman gold flowing east for silk.
He did complain bitterly about it. Estimated Rome was hemorrhaging something like 100 million sesterces a year eastward, mostly for silk, spices, gems, saw it as weakening the empire.
And into China itself. Was it just for export?
Oh no, the sources say it was incredibly valuable internally too, almost like a form of currency for high-value transactions, paying officials, rewarding soldiers, even paying taxes in silk.
Wow, so it underpinned their economy. And they guarded the secret of how to make it really closely.
Fiercely. It was like a state secret. Sericulture raising the silkworms, processing the cocoons. The sources mention constant attempts by others, Sogdians in Central Asia, Iranians, Romans, trying to get their hands on the worms and the know-how.
How'd they try?
There are all these stories, maybe embellished a bit over time, but they reflect the reality. Smuggling silkworm eggs or mulberry, seeds the worm's food out of China. Hidden in hollow walking sticks, apparently, or even in women's elaborate hairstyles.
Ancient industrial espionage. That's brilliant.
It really highlights the huge economic advantage China had for centuries. But an important point the sources make is that silk didn't always just go straight from A to B producer to consumer.
You mentioned a value chain earlier.
Yeah.
How did that work on the Silk Road?
Okay, I think of it like this. Maybe the raw silk fiber, the thread, comes from China.
Right.
It travels to, say, Central Asia or India. There, skilled weavers turn it into cloth, maybe mixing it with local stuff like cotton. Then that cloth gets traded further west, maybe to Iran or Syria. There, it gets dyed using unique local dyes and methods, maybe adorned with specific Persian or Syrian patterns.
Adding local flavor.
Exactly. Then maybe that cloth goes on to Byzantium, Constantinople. Perhaps it gets some final embroidery, some finishing touches there, and then it finally reaches the market in Rome or somewhere else in Europe.
So each step adds value, adds cultural input. Involves different people.
Totally. So the silk you bought in Rome might have had this incredibly international production journey. It wasn't just transport, it was creation and transformation along the way.
That implies a lot of interaction, sharing of techniques, artistic ideas.
Deep interdependencies, yeah. Really facilitated that exchange. Okay, so beyond silk, what else was filling up those caravans?
The spices, got to be spices, right? Always valuable.
Hugely valuable. Things like cinnamon, pepper, cloves, nutmeg, mostly from South and Southeast Asia, traveling west. Prized for food, yeah, but also medicine, perfumes, rituals, even preserving food before refrigeration. Small, light, high value, perfect for long distance.
What else?
Precious stones, rubies, emeralds, sapphires from places like India, Central Asia. Chinese jade, obviously huge in China, but it found markets westward too.
Oh.
And the sources even mention Indian steel.
Indian steel, really? Used in the West?
Yeah, Pliny the Elder again. He specifically praised the quality of steel coming from India, sometimes called it Parthian iron, because it reached Rome through the Parthian Empire. This was really high quality, early steel, great for weapons, tools.
That's amazing. I didn't know that.
And later on, of course, a huge one was paper-making technology spreading west from China. And from the north, you had valuable furs, sable, mink, fox traded south and west.
So luxuries, raw materials, technology.
Right.
Quite a mix going west. What about the other way? What went east?
Good question. Often the trade balance favored the East, especially China, because their luxury goods were just so in demand.
Right, like Pliny complained.
So a big thing going east from the West, especially the Roman Empire, was precious metals, gold and silver.
Paying for all that silk and spice.
Exactly. Roman coins, particularly silver denarii or coins based on Alexander the Great's silver dirhams, actually became like a common currency in parts of the network for a while. Made trade easier.
What else besides money?
Ivory, mostly from Africa, came via the Mediterranean and Middle East, then headed east. Various fruits and plants, things like figs, cucumbers, grapes, are thought to have been introduced to parts of Asia from the west along these routes.
Okay.
Animals too, horses, lambs sometimes, and, sadly, people. Slaves, eunuchs were also traded, often for royal courts or wealthy households.
So definitely a two-way street, even if the balance wasn't always even. A huge diversity of stuff moving.
Really a cross-section of the material wealth and resources of the known world at that time. But it's crucial to remember, as the sources stress, not every item went end to end.
Right, it wasn't like today where you ship a container from Shenzhen straight to Rotterdam.
Exactly, not like that at all. The sources make a big point that a lot of the trade was actually local or regional.
How so?
Goods might just travel a few hundred miles, get sold in an oasis city market, change hands, then maybe get traded onwards by a totally different group of merchants speaking a different language.
Oh, okay.
So that bolt of silk from Xi'an might pass through 5, 6, 7 different intermediaries before it ever got close to Antioch or Rome. A Roman glass bowl might only make it halfway to Central Asia, find a buyer there, and that's its journey done.
So it's more like a chain reaction of trade, region by region.
Yes, this layered, incremental trade. And that created wealth and opportunities for communities all along the way, not just at the endpoints.
And it also means the empires controlling those middle sections had a big stake in keeping it going.
Huge stake, yeah, the economics of control. Governments made serious money from this. Tolls, customs duties, taxes on the goods and merchants passing through.
Must have been a vital income stream for some states.
Absolutely critical for funding this start. And that income, well, it was often reinvested, partly at least, back into the system, paying for security forces, guarding against bandits, and importantly, building and maintaining those way stations, the caravanserais.
The roadside inns you mentioned.
Exactly. Fortified inns, usually spaced about a day's journey apart. Safe lodging, stables for animals, places to get water, food, essential infrastructure. And the sources note some of these were built on foundations laid centuries even before the Silk Road proper got going.
Which brings us neatly to Iran. Its role seems absolutely central in all this. The sources really emphasize Iran wasn't just on the road, it was the critical bridge, the power broker.
That's a key takeaway, definitely. The geography of the Iranian plateau just naturally funnels movement east-west. And way before the Han started looking west, the ancient Achaemenid Persian Empire.
Darius and Xerxes. That empire.
That's the one, 550-330 BC. They'd already built amazing infrastructure to connect their huge territory. The sources highlight the Achaemenid Royal Road.
With Royal Road, right, heard of that.
Incredible feat, 2,500 kilometers long, stretching from western Turkey all the way to Susa and Persepolis in Iran.
2,500 kilometers.
Yeah.
Built over 2,500 years ago.
Astonishing. It was mainly for fast imperial messages, horse messengers, but it also supported military movements and, yes, caravans. So when the routes from China started pushing west,
they just plugged into this existing Iranian network.
Pretty much. Iran already had the backbone in place, the roads, the support system, centuries before we even talk about Silk Roads.
So they were set up perfectly.
Yes. And the Parthian Empire, which came to power there around the 2nd century BC, they were perfectly positioned, right place, right time, to become that essential intermediary between Han China expanding west and the Roman world wanting goods from the east. They controlled the land bridge.
The ultimate middleman.
You got it. And the sources pinpoint a really specific important moment, 115 BC.
What happened then?
That's when the first recorded Chinese ambassador, Zhang Qian, actually arrived in Parthia. He was formally welcomed by the Parthian king, Merdeb II. This wasn't just traders bumping into each other. This was high-level diplomacy.
Okay, so that's maybe the real birth date of the Silk Road as an official thing. Political, commercial.
You could argue that, yeah. It signaled mutual recognition, potential for serious long-distance stuff, and crucially, political agreements. Guarantees to try and keep the routes secure.
And the Parthians could back that up. Were they strong?
So yeah, militarily very strong. Famous for their heavy cavalry, the cataphracts, and those skilled horse archers using the Parthian shot firing backwards while retreating. They were constantly jostling with Rome, fighting over border zones like Armenia, Syria.
That conflict must have affected trade, like you said before, pushing routes north sometimes.
It definitely did. And the sources use examples like the huge Roman defeat at Carrhae in 53 BC, where General Crassus was killed, famously to show Parthian strength. They held their border on the Euphrates against Rome. And throughout their long rule, the sources stress that trade income, taxing the caravans, was absolutely vital for the Parthian state.
Okay, so Parthians were key. What about the Sassanids? They replaced the Parthians in the 3rd century AD. Same approach.
Similar, but the sources, especially drawing on analysis by people like Arash-Rizanejad, argue the Sassanids were maybe even more systematic, more centralized in how they controlled the trade.
More centralized. How?
Well, the founder, Ardashir Babakhan, seems to have had this very strategic vision, almost modern, you could say. He didn't just passively benefit from the land routes. He actively brought previously semi-independent cities along the routes under tighter government control, and he invested heavily in maritime trade, too.
Ah, sea routes as well.
Big time. The sources mention him building new ports or seriously developing existing ones on the Persian Gulf, places like Karg Island near modern Basra, and the really important port of Siraf.
So they saw the connection between land and sea power for trade?
Yeah.
Trying to control both.
Seems like it. They fought major wars with Rome and later Byzantium over places like Syria, but they also had periods of peace, often because they both needed to deal with threats from northern tribes, Huns, Hephthalites.
Why?
And when the land routes felt insecure, maybe because of those northern threats or war with Byzantium, the Sassanids deliberately pushed sea trade via the Persian Gulf, connecting straight to India. They even, the sources mention, campaigned down in Yemen.
Yemen. Why Yemen?
To stop the Romans and Byzantines from developing a competing sea route that bypassed Iran entirely, going up the Red Sea.
Wow. That's serious strategic maneuvering over trade routes way back then.
It shows just how central controlling these flows was to state power, to their survival and wealth. So Iran's story of Achaemenids, Parthians, Sassanids, it really highlights this lesson the sources draw out. Incredible potential as a connector, but that advantage is fragile. When central power weakens, stability collapses, the routes become insecure, trade shifts. History teaches that lesson again and again there.
So Iran wasn't just a passive bridge. It was active, strategic, shaping the network for over 1,000 years.
Absolutely fundamental to the whole idea of a continuous overland east-west connection.
Okay, routes, goods, empires, geography. Covered a lot. But these roads, as the sources really stress, they weren't just for stuff. They were for people, and with people. My ideas, culture, religion, technology.
This is maybe the deepest impact, right? The trade, the economics drove a lot of it. But the constant movement merchants, yes, but also missionaries, pilgrims, diplomats, soldiers, just regular travelers that made these routes incredible channels for cultural exchange. Intellectual exchange on a scale Eurasia had never seen before.
It was like ancient globalization, long before we had the word.
Totally. And the spread of major religions is a perfect example the sources focus on. Buddhism, for instance.
Right, spreading from India.
Exactly. It traveled from India, northwest into Central Asia, across the Tibetan Plateau, eventually reaching China, becoming huge there. And that spread was massively helped by the trade routes. Merchants provided the infrastructure, the support for monks and missionaries.
Where were the key centers?
Sources mention places like Merv, Balkh in Central Asia, major Buddhist centers, interestingly, often built on sites that used to be Zoroastrian fire temples. Shows that layering of cultures. And the Kushan Empire, controlling that region for a while, they were big patrons of Buddhism. And they did this fascinating blend, mixing Buddhist ideas with older Iranian royal concepts, like the king being a mediator between heaven and earth.
So the religion itself changed as it moved along the routes.
Exactly. It became syncretic, yeah. Absorbed local elements. Manichaeism is another incredible example the sources point to.
Manichaeism. I've heard of it, but vaguely.
Founded by Manichae in Mesopotamia, 3rd century AD, it was explicitly a missionary faith. His followers were incredibly active travelers, creatures, and they used the existing trade networks to spread like wildfire. Astonishing speed and range.
How far did it actually get?
It's amazing. The sources note it didn't just go east along the Silk Road routes into Central Asia, China. It went west, too, right through the Roman Empire, reached Egypt, North Africa, even into Europe. There were Manichaean communities found as far as the Alps Gaul, modern France.
Wow. From Mesopotamia to France and China, using these ancient routes.
It just shows how connected everything was even then. A new religion from the Middle East could get followers from Spain to China in just a few centuries, all thanks to people moving along these paths.
Incredible. What else spread?
Well, the sources suggest mystery cults like Mithraism probably spread between the Roman and Parthian worlds through these interactions, and later, of course, Islam. With the rise of the Islamic empires, those same routes, especially the big Khorasan road going east from Baghdad, became the main highway for Islam, spreading into Central Asia, Afghanistan, towards India, China.
So these trade routes literally reshaped the religious map of the world.
Absolutely fundamental shifts in belief, philosophy, and beyond religion. Art styles, architecture, languages moved too. Sogdian, which was an Eastern Iranian language. Yeah.
It became a major lingua franca, a common trade language in Central Asia, used by merchants of all different backgrounds. And critically, technology.
Technology followed the roads too, like what?
Papermaking is the huge one the sources highlight. Invented in China, obviously. Transformative technology. It spread westward. There's that famous story, maybe partly legend, but based in fact, about Chinese papermakers being captured after a battle.
Which battle?
Battle Talis, 751 AD, between the Tang Chinese and the Abbasid Caliphate in Central Asia. Supposedly, these captured artisans brought the secret of papermaking to the Islamic world.
And from there to Europe, eventually?
Exactly, centuries later. And think about what that meant. Not just paper, but the ability to spread information, knowledge, literature, so much more easily and cheaply than using parchment or vellum. World-changing.
Enabled by these ancient connections. Totally. And later on, things like printing, the compass, gunpowder, maybe they didn't only travel overland, but these routes were definitely key corridors for the initial ideas and knowledge moving west from China. So, yeah, goods, ideas, religions, art, language, tech, all crossing Eurasia.
All this connection, all this movement. It had a dark side too, didn't it?
It absolutely did. Just like goods and ideas, so did germs, pathogens.
Oh, disease.
Yeah. Moving people and animals across these vast distances, living closely together in caravans for us. It created perfect pathways for diseases to spread, and the sources are pretty clear about the Silk Road's role in some major epidemics.
Are we talking the Black Death?
That's the big one they focus on, the Black Plague. Historical evidence, genetic evidence now too, strongly suggests it was carried westward, probably originated somewhere in Central Asia, maybe China, and traveled along the Silk Road trade routes.
To Europe.
Reaching Europe, often via trading posts in the Crimea, then by ship, starting around the mid-14th century, and causing just catastrophic death tolls.
That's a really sobering thought. The same roads bringing silk and Buddhism also brought the plague.
It's a brutal, tragic, unintended consequence of that deep connectivity. And the plague's arrival. It effectively shut down or drastically changed trade for a long time. And the sources emphasize its impact in Europe was immense.
How so?
Massive population drop, obviously, huge labor shortages. That led to social unrest, peasant revolts. And historians often argue it was a major factor in weakening the whole feudal system. Paved the way for big societal changes later on.
So the network that fostered all this interaction also carried the seeds of its own disruption by destabilizing the societies it connected.
It's a really powerful example of those complex, sometimes dark feedback loops in history. Connectivity isn't always benign.
Okay, so this incredible network, going strong for 1,700 years, it eventually faded. It didn't just stop overnight, but what caused the decline of the traditional Silk Road, say, from the 15th century onwards?
It seems to be a mix of factors, according to the sources. Right. One was definitely renewed political instability in key areas.
Like what?
You had really destructive conquests like Timur or Tamerlane in the late 14th, early 15th century. His campaigns just devastated major trading hubs. Samarkand, Bukhara, Isfahan. Really disrupted the network.
Tore up the heartland.
Exactly. And then the rise of these large, often competing empires, the Ottomans, Safavid Iran, the Mongols in India, while they provided stability within their borders, trade between them could get difficult. Higher tolls, taxes, sometimes outright blockades during wars, made that long overland trek less appealing, less reliable.
So fragmentation, rivalry between the big players hurt the flow.
It did. But probably the biggest factor, the sources argue, was the game changer. Reliable, large-scale sea trade developed by Europeans.
Ah, the age of discovery. Columbus, Vasco da Gama, looking for sea routes to Asia.
Precisely. Starting late 15th century, Portuguese, Spanish first, then the Dutch, French, British. They were all desperately looking for ways to get to India, Southeast Asia, China, without going through the traditional overland routes, bypassing the middlemen in the Middle East and Italy.
And going around Africa or eventually across the Atlantic and Pacific.
Exactly. Opening up totally new global sea lanes. And sea travel just had huge advantages over caravans.
Like what?
Volume, mainly. Ships could carry vastly more cargo than camels or pack animals, often cheaper per ton, especially over long distances. And while sea travel was still risky as navigation got better, it could actually be more predictable than crossing thousands of miles of land, dealing with bandits, political instability.
Right. Fewer borders to cross, maybe.
Fewer tolls, fewer potential disruptions. So as maritime tech improved, sea trade just became more efficient, more dominant for bulk goods and even luxuries.
So the economic center of gravity shifted from land routes across Eurasia to sea routes circling the globe.
That's a good way to put it. And that gradually pushed the traditional Silk Roads out of the limelight. They declined in importance for that really long-distance, high-value international trade. Regional trade continued, of course, but they weren't the main arteries of global commerce anymore, faded for centuries.
Faded into history books, romantic notions. Until, remarkably, very recently. Now suddenly that name Silk Road is everywhere again. Front page news, geopolitics, global economy.
It's back with a vengeance, isn't it? And the sources pin this comeback squarely on one massive modern project driven by China.
China's Belt and Road Initiative, the BRI, often explicitly called the New Silk Road.
That's the one. And the sources frame it as really China's signature foreign policy, economic policy, as a rising global power. It reflects their ambition to connect with the world, shape the world in the 21st century. And they draw that interesting parallel back to 19th century Germany.
Right, another rising power, coining the original term when they were looking east.
Exactly. History rhyming, perhaps.
So what's driving China to do this enormous BRI project? What are the motivations?
Sources point to both major economic drivers and pretty significant strategic ones. Economically, China became the world's factory, right? Producing huge amounts of stuff.
Steel, cement, trains.
Everything. The BRI is partly a way to find markets for all that industrial output. Building infrastructure in developing countries uses up that capacity, and it also connects those economies much more closely to China's. Creates pathways for future trade.
So find markets, build the roads to reach them? Makes sense.
Yeah, and then strategically, the BRI is very much about creating alternative trade corridors, both overland belts and maritime roads. And this is seen as a way for China to reduce its heavy dependence on existing sea lanes. Choke points that could be vulnerable if tensions rise.
Which choke points are we talking about? What are the sources worried about?
They specifically mention the Strait of Malacca, that narrow passage near Singapore.
Right. Huge amounts of shipping go through there.
Massive amount of China's imported oil, container traffic, has to go through Malacca, and also the Strait of Hormuz, out of the Persian Gulf, for energy. The sources even bring in this striking historical note. Accounts suggesting Nixon linked the Vietnam War partly to controlling access to Malacca.
Wow. Shows how long these points have been strategic.
Absolutely. And Obama's later pivot to Asia is also mentioned as being seen by China, perhaps, as an effort to reinforce U.S. influence right in those critical sea lanes.
So for China, those sea lanes look like a potential weakness. And the BRI, especially the belt part, the land routes, is a way to build alternatives, more secure routes across Eurasia.
That seems to be a major strategic rationale, yeah. Maybe inspired by the old Silk Roads, Chinese strategists saw the potential to reconnect the Eurasian landmass with modern infrastructure, railways, pipelines, and President Xi Jinping really championed that vision.
And the scale of it is just mind-boggling.
It really is unprecedented in modern history. Yeah. The sources describe this vast web of projects planned under construction. High-speed rail, highways, pipelines, ports, power grids, industrial zones, spanning what, at least 71 countries? Across Asia, Europe, Africa, physically linking their economies more closely to China.
That sounds very different from the original Silk Roads, though. Those grew organically over centuries. Lots of different players.
That's a really crucial contrast the sources make.
Yeah, the historical Silk Roads evolved more naturally. Pre-existing routes, lots of different merchants, different kingdoms, shifting alliances. The BRI, it's deliberate, top-down, centrally planned, financed, driven mainly by one single dominant global power, China, with very specific strategic and economic goals in mind.
a conscious effort to rewire global connections. And how is the rest of the world reacting? Is this just happening without pushback?
Oh, definitely not happening in a vacuum.
Yeah.
The sources argue you really need to understand the BRI, China's ambition, these alternative corridors, the potential shift in influence to make sense of a lot of what other major powers are doing, especially the U.S.
How so?
They frame U.S. actions, U.S. strategic interest in many of these regions along the proposed BRI routes, Central Asia, Afghanistan, the Caucasus, Middle East, Africa, even up in the Arctic, the Indian Ocean, as being, at least partly, reactions to the BRI. Engaging with it, competing with it, trying to shape it, or offer alternatives. So these ancient routes, or at least the idea of them, are kind of a framework again, maybe even a battleground for great power competition in our century.
It seems that way. The historical name, coined when European powers were shifting, is now describing a project that signals another potential global power shift. And it's generating reactions, competition, that really echo the strategic rivalries over the original Silk Roads, centuries and centuries ago.
Wow, okay. So we've gone from this really simple, inaccurate picture one road, just silk, to understanding this incredibly complex dynamic network, spanning millennia, moving amazing goods, sparking huge changes in religion, technology, carrying plagues, adapting, declining, and now, incredibly, giving us a lens to understand major geopolitical shifts happening right now.
It really drives home how interconnected the world has always been, in really complex ways, and how the lessons from back then about stability and trade, about strategic competition over routes, about those unintended consequences of interaction, they're still incredibly relevant. They haven't gone away.
And the sources leave us with that really powerful, maybe slightly ominous thought, referencing England trying to check Germany's eastward push, leading towards World War, and asking if we're seeing a similar dynamic now, America and China, over this new Silk Road.
Yeah, it poses that stark question, is history just going to repeat itself here?
So maybe the question for you listening is this. Given that long, complex history, great powers competing, often fiercely, over these strategic routes, over influence across Eurasia, what lessons should we be taking from the old Silk Roads right now? How do we navigate the geopolitics of this new Silk Road? Can understanding that deep past actually help us find a path forward that maybe avoids the kinds of conflicts that arose from similar competition before? It's a challenging thought, definitely, as these ancient pathways echo so strongly in our modern world.